You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network. This is Talking Headways, a weekly podcast about sustainable transportation and urban design. I'm Jeff Wood. This week we're joined by Cortni Desir of the Connecticut Department of Transportation at the Mpact conference in Portland, Oregon. We discuss her international influences, customer experience, homelessness in transit, and being curious. Stay with us. Today's podcast is brought to you by our super wonderful, terrific, stupendous Patreon supporters. We appreciate you all keeping this show and Mondays at the Overhead Wire going. To join this merry band of city aficionados and transportation savants, go to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. $2 a month could get you some stickers and a handwritten note sent with a cool train station stamp. $10 a month gets you one of our transportation scars. And if you just want to give a single dollar a month, you'll be able to get a podcast feed with 0 outside ads or podcasts. We'll leave information in the show notes about how to do it. We've also got some bonus material up there, and we'll be posting more soon, so check it out if you haven't already. And speaking of scarves, the heavyweight knit bike scarf is back in stock, and of course, it's getting cold out, so you need one. For you, for your friends, your colleagues, or for the anti-bus activists you just want to frustrate. If you want to get one of the bus or bike scarves or the lightweight bike scarf now, visit theoverheadwire.com or support us on Patreon. And if you want to support the show in other ways, you can buy books from the authors we've chatted with on the podcast at the bookshop site, bookshop.org/shop/theoverheadwire, or find our Cars Are Cholesterol merch at bit.ly/carsarecholesterol. For anything else, including the Town Planning and Practice audiobook, visit theoverheadwire.com and definitely sign up for the almost 20-year-old daily newsletter at theoverheadwire.com, or you can just keep listening and enjoy the show. We appreciate that too. You can find us on Blue Sky, Mastodon, Threads, Instagram, Flickr, YouTube, Substack, and LinkedIn if you want to connect. Usually at the Overhead Wire, but with Flickr, it's Transit Nerds. Some great stuff coming up, so keep on listening and enjoy the show. Cortni Desir, welcome to the Talking Headways podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. Before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Cortni Desir, and we're here talking at the Mpact Transit and Community Conference. I'm a member of the Mpact National Steering Committee, which is a group of transit professionals that helps organize the conference every year. And I work for the Connecticut Department of Transportation. We're a partner of Mpact. We joined last year. And I'm the executive program manager for public transportation, which means that I help advance strategic and capital planning for rail, bus, and ferry services across the state of Connecticut.
Does that mean that we're going to get an Mpact conference in Connecticut soon?
I think that would be awesome. I think we might need to build our rail connection to the airport first to make that more realistic. But we do have bus connections to the airport, so we can make that happen.
You don't need a rail connection to the airport to have an impact, you know.
No.
But yeah, it's such a fun conference. Have you been to Portland before?
This is my first time.
What do you think so far? I'm sure you've been out and seen a couple of things, right?
So I haven't been able to venture too far away from the downtown area, but I love it. I am amazed at how transit rich it is, and I spent a lot of time and not enough time wandering around Pal's bookstore yesterday. And also it was great. I was carrying with me, I have a CT rail tote bag that has the system map on it. And the person at the cash register was fascinated. And so we had this whole conversation about the Connecticut rail system map and how they loved it. It was great.
That's awesome. Well, so I want to go back in time a little bit and ask you, what was your first indication that you'd be interested in cities or transportation or policy? Was it when you were a little kid and you're just like, this is what I want to do? Or is it something you kind of fell into later on?
Definitely not when I was a little kid. I didn't really understand that was a field that somebody could go into. I would say I really started thinking seriously about cities, not even cities, but just the built environment in 2011, right after undergrad, I moved to Bahrain, which is a small country right next to Saudi Arabia. And I was there during the Arab Spring protest movement. And I saw the way in which the government leveraged the street network to control protest. And it really started to get my mind thinking about the importance of the built environment, how it can both be an engine for public protest. In Bahrain, there was this intersection named the Pearl Roundabout. It was named that because there was a large pearl statue in the center of it. And that is the main gathering place where the protest movement there had kicked off. And then part of the reason that the protest movement eventually was quieted, to put it gently, is that the government was able to control the streets and the roads. And the Pearl Roundabout was closed down by the government and ended up being closed down for years. I think because of the fear that the space could invite people back in again. And so they actually, when they reopened it, they had completely redesigned it. It was no longer a roundabout. They created a signalized intersection. But those were the days that sort of sparked me thinking about the form of the city and the role that it plays in people's lives. But then after Bahrain, I moved to DC, and residential segregation became super obvious to me. It got me starting to think about the city and the way that people move around the city. And at the time, through my work, had been assigned to do a case study on something called Ushahidi, which was a platform in Kenya. I forget in which year. I think it was following a presidential election. There were protests or a wave of violence, and a group of concerned advocates started mapping where things were happening as a safety tool, as a reporting mechanism to document what was going on in the country. And this Ushahidi became part of this larger movement of crisis mapping. And so I had gotten very interested in it, and it was really my first time interacting with the idea that people make maps. Maps don't just show up, that people make them, and that people have to put a place on a map for it to be mapped. And so that piqued my interest in GIS. And in my next job, I was working for the George Washington University, who had just launched their graduate certificate in GIS. So I used my tuition benefit as an employee and got my graduate certificate in GIS. And I loved it. That's what really got me to want to go into city planning, and even made me aware of the fact that those kinds of programs existed.
It's so interesting. My undergrad was in geography, and so I did a lot of data mapping and GIS before too. And until you read some of the texts about maps, you don't really realize, until you think about it a little bit more, how much it's the history is written by the victors type of thing. And so a lot of maps, for example, are drawn a certain way in order to convey information a certain way. And so I find that really fascinating. The manipulation for positive and negative of data is really powerful. And so those examples that you gave are really interesting.
Yeah, it blew my mind. And this is in 2013, 2014. And we were doing projects to map places that hadn't been mapped before. Of course, yes, there's the large country outline, but sort of if you zoom into a city or a community, the features of that community, the roadway network, the environmental amenities, they just didn't exist in a digital format. And those can become really important in the case of emergency response or disaster response. I think, one of the examples that I remember learning about and really resonated with me was following the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, that much of Port-au-Prince in the surrounding areas weren't properly mapped. And in order to have effective emergency response, you need that data. So there was, an urgent effort to map those areas.
You're in Bahrain, you're talking about Kenya, about Haiti, about places that many Americans probably have never been to, much less thought about. I'm curious what brought you to kind of invest your time in these destinations and thinking about them.
Yeah. So when I was in high school, I was very much interested in what was beyond the United States. So when I went into undergrad, I chose to study Arabic. I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but I think when I was 18, the sort of spy movie allure of being a CIA agent drove me to want to become a student of Arabic language. That's certainly not the direction that studying Arabic or the history of the Middle East took me, but that was the beginning of the path. I studied Arabic and Middle Eastern history, also studied post-colonial history, and was very much interested in the dynamics of colonialism and occupation and the ways in which they shaped I didn't know it at the time, but I was very much interested in the way that they shaped cities and communities, those dynamics. So that's what got me to Bahrain after graduation. I very much wanted to situate myself somewhere in the Arab world. And then I moved back to the United States and was still working on the Arab world and also on Iran, thinking about the intersection of technology and governance. And even when I applied to my city planning program, I thought I was going into the international development track. And once I got there, I loved the theory and the history that we were studying in the international development track. But my second semester of grad school, because I had taken my GIS certificate prior to going into the planning program, I wanted to be able to use it. So I applied and got an internship with Boston's regional planning agency. And that was really the first time where I felt like my passion for thinking locally start to come around. I loved working on helping projects data to inform housing production plans, thinking about at the time we were working on, I believe it was called the State of Equity, so learning how to pull in all of the census data and other data sources to really paint a picture of equity in the region. And so that was, I would say, the start of my second career, where I said goodbye to Arabic and the Arab world and really started to focus locally, because after I graduated, I then took a position as an analyst in the Office of Innovation and Analytics for the city of Somerville, Massachusetts, a program called Somerstat. And that role was all about city operations, and it solidified my love for it.
So what do you take with you from the previous experiences, though? Obviously, it introduced you to cities and the ways that, streets and people interact with their governments and things like that. But what do you take with you from that to maybe today where you're working at the Connecticut Department of Transportation?
I think one of the skills that I take with me is knowing to always ask questions, always trying to dig a little bit deeper and understand what maybe isn't written or what isn't being told, questioning the narrative. And I don't always mean that in sort of like an interrogation or aggressive way, but, always being curious. And I think that is something that is very valuable, transferable, and really important in public service, is to ask questions and to stay curious.
Do you find it's easy for other, I've found in the past that it can be hard to teach curiosity. And I'm wondering if you've come across this where you're a curious person. Is it hard when there's other folks that may not be as curious, or is it hard to teach curiosity?
Yeah, absolutely. I've come across those situations. I think in many public service agencies, whether it's, local, state, government, that there will be staff who have been there or have been taught that this is how we do things. And for a variety of reasons, maybe it's working perfectly well, or they don't want to rock the boat. They're comfortable in that, not asking more questions. And that can be really challenging. And so I think the way that I approach it is that I want people to feel empowered to be able to ask questions. Sometimes, real or imagined, people might not think that their questions are welcome. And so if I'm talking about, onboarding someone who's going to be reporting to me, that's a value or a work norm that I try and put on the table day one is, hey, on our team, we are open to asking questions. We hear each other and we'll receive the questions and figure them out together. But really just setting that expectation from day one that that's the kind of environment that we work with. Now, for folks who are not directly reporting to me, or, I don't get the benefit of a fresh recruit who we can, shape this environment together or create that culture. I think you have to build trust first. In my position at Connecticut DOT and in my previous work, I have had the opportunity to have a position where I get to work with people across the organizational chart. In one of my positions, I frequently worked directly with department heads, and my mandate from the mayor's office was to get certain things done, but the department heads weren't my direct report. So it was a lot of relationship building, being an empathetic listener, helping people see that I was there to help them and really start to build that trust. And also let them know that I'm asking questions because I come into their subject matter expertise, humbly, someone who hasn't spent their whole career working in that field or on that topic, and that I'm asking questions from a place of curiosity, from a place of wanting to understand. And, me asking a question isn't me critiquing the way that you do something. It's simply trying to understand. So it's a lot of relationship building.
Yeah. I like that. That's why I do this show, is so I can question people without, and because everybody comes at their job or in their life with all of these experiences that they've had that I have never had. And I always say that I wish that I'd lived a million years, and not because I want to be the king of something, but I want to be an observer. And I feel like there's so many people with so many really good ideas. There's so many ways of looking at things that you can learn from. And so I find that fascinating as well.
Yeah. And one other thing I would add to that is, it's not just asking the questions, but then showing people how me hearing their answers turns into something. Like, I'm not just asking questions or extracting information for the sake of gathering it. I'm taking that and hopefully helping, working with them to build a solution to a problem or a challenge that they've been facing. And so similar to you, you ask people all kinds of questions, but then you put it together in this published product that then helps others learn from the conversations that you've had. And so the questions then result in value. And I think it's important for people to see that and to understand and realize that their contributions made that value, and that their work matters and that they matter.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so I want to ask you a little bit about Connecticut DOT. The state operates a little differently. I mean, it operates like other states, but from a transportation standpoint, it has a transit agency. But, states like Massachusetts, states like New York, others, they have agencies that are individual, but not at the state level. I'm curious how that makes it a little bit different than other places, maybe when you're thinking about expansions or planning for capital projects or doing a number of different things that transit agencies do.
Okay, so I'll caveat my answer with, this is the first time I've worked for a Department of Transportation or a state agency. So my knowledge of how DOT compares to other places, I have been has been a crash course in the last year and a half of me trying to understand not only how do we work, but when I go to talk to peers, I need to understand how the way that we do things may or may not be similar to how they're able to do things. So Connecticut DOT, most states, your DOTs are a highway agency. In Connecticut, DOT oversees the state's highway system as well as the state's public transportation system. For us, that means we operate our commuter rail services. We have over 240 miles of passenger rail service that we operate across 3 different lines. We also own part of the Northeast Corridor between the New York-Connecticut border and New Haven. In addition, we operate 75% of the state's bus service. Now, unlike a transit agency, the operators of our trains and of our buses are not DOT employees. So for each of our services, we contract out to a provider. So for example, on the New Haven line, the service that operates from New Haven into New York City, that's operated by Metro North of the MTA. But Connecticut, as the state, is responsible for capital improvements along the corridor and on the branch lines. So that has some pluses and minuses. We're a small team within the DOT when it comes to public transportation. We're about 140 people in my bureau. But if you were to include the staff and operators that we contract to keep people moving on bus and rail, I think the number is closer to 6,000 people. So it's a big system. It's a tiny state, but we got a lot going on. In some ways, being part of the DOT is a benefit because as a state agency, when it comes time for legislative proposals and preparing for the legislative session, we always have the ability to have a voice. It doesn't mean that the governor's office or the legislators are going to listen to what we say, but we're always invited. And I think taken seriously because we are a state agency. And I think that dynamic is probably a little bit different than in other states. I think it probably also makes it a little bit easier for us to partner with other state agencies and benefit from resources they can provide. And in particular, one of the sort of circumstances or examples I'm thinking of is this week here at Mpact, I'll be speaking with some colleagues from TriMet here in Portland and VTA in California about transit agencies' roles and responsibilities in supporting unhoused individuals on the transit system. And for us in Connecticut, being able to have those partnerships with other state agencies is really key to our approach to supporting unhoused individuals.
Are you tied in closely with state housing department or state aid departments of other kinds because of that? It makes it easier because you're a state agency, you can kind of interact with them on that level?
So I would say the two departments that we work most closely with would be the Department of Mental Health and Human Services. The other is the Connecticut State Police, because we have both an outreach and support approach that's complemented with an enforcement approach. And yes, I think our position as a state agency is helpful there because I think it also makes the use of state funds a little bit easier.
So you're going to be chatting about that at the conference. I'm wondering if you can kind of give us a little preview about like what the discussion might look like or like what people are thinking along these lines, because it is a very contentious, hot, fraught topic and very sensitive to discuss. It's
complex. Spoiler alert. Well, at this point, when you're hearing this,
it'll be several weeks after.
Will have already happened. But the takeaway from the conversation is that yes, it's hard. Nobody has a perfect solution for it, and I think almost certainly the folks that are going to be speaking together this week, but I think across many agencies, it's not something that one agency can do alone. Transit agencies at their core are about moving people, not about housing people, but we have to be part of the solution. And part of the reason that this falls to transit agencies in some places is that when individuals have nowhere else to go, they seek shelter in transit infrastructure, whether it's a station or a bus stop. They need a place that they feel is safe and protected from the elements. And sometimes figuring out how to navigate that situation comes in conflict with how an agency wants to create a certain customer experience. And so you're trying to balance providing support to folks who really need it and also creating a certain environment that customers might expect. So that can be a really challenging line to figure out.
I think it's hard for folks to understand sometimes the downstream effects of homelessness in the sense that when, as you mentioned, when homeless folks don't have a place to live, they seek shelter in public spaces. And the most public spaces, a bus or a train sometimes, and providing warmth. The buses have heaters. I'm sure that's worse in Connecticut in the winter than, say, like San Francisco most of the time because it's different temperature. But I find that a lot of folks, when they have these discussions, they don't quite understand that all these social services are connected and the bus is just the last place and the end of the downstream effect. And so that's where it shows up, but that's not necessarily the place where the impacts are happening. And so as an agency, it seems like you can only control so much because there's only so much that a transit agency can do. But the transit agencies are the ones that see the impacts of something maybe further upstream.
Absolutely. And so, in terms of what we can do, our approach is an outreach approach first. So we have a small team within Connecticut DOT that we essentially have one person for an entire state whose role is to build relationships with the social service providers. They build the relationships with law enforcement. And this is really part of the complexity of this is that we're talking, Connecticut's a small state, but we have 169 municipalities. Our public transit services reach over 100 of those municipalities. So you have all these different jurisdictions to engage and to create partnerships with. And so we have a safety and security team. And on that team, there's one person whose main responsibility is to do this relationship building and to create a program with, quite frankly, not a whole lot of resources. And so it's very dependent upon our partnerships. One of those partnerships, as I mentioned, is with the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, GMAS, and through them, they've been able to fund, they're called THOP teams, Transit Homeless Outreach Project, T-HOP. And we have 3 teams in the state located in some of our busiest areas. So there's one in the city of Hartford, one in the city of New Haven, and one in the city of Bridgeport. And these are professionals who are trained in doing outreach and can connect with individuals and help them get to services. That's a really important partnership. And outside of that, too, it's not just limited to those 3 T-HOP teams. Our staff also work to build connections in other places. If an issue comes up and it's a place that they're not as familiar with, they'll get on the phone, they'll start calling local organizations and figure out who's the right agency or organization to respond or to assist. And then also have a partnership with the Connecticut State Police to provide some coverage of our CT rail lines, our CT Rail Hartford line, as well as our CT Fast Track, which is Connecticut's bus rapid transit service in central Connecticut and Hartford. We do not have a dedicated transit police or security force, so the partnership is something like 4 officers, if they're available, to take shifts to cover a really wide geographic area. This approach, and our team is really proud of it. It's something that has evolved over the last several years and I think has made great strides. But then it's also a safety issue. One of the tricky situations that happens is when you have individuals building encampments along the rail right of way. And that is a safety concern for them and for others. And so it's great to say, oh yeah, we have the outreach team. But sometimes even the outreach team and the best of intentions, they're not always able to provide what individuals need. And so it can take time to get people out of these unsafe situations and into a situation that is safer for them and for others. Yeah, that's a big challenge.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the experience stuff because you all have put together a document that kind of goes over what the customer experience should look like or will look like over the next several years. Started it a number of years ago, but I'm wondering how that kind of document comes together. Like, how do you talk to folks who you're reaching out to see what riders want? Because obviously there's going to be a lot of different opinions on that, right?
Yeah,
and so you have to outreach to a number of different folks. I'm curious how that comes together and then what the results are and how far along you are in fulfilling some of the wishes and dreams of the riders of your system.
So the Customer Experience Action Plan in Connecticut was published in 2023 after months, if not over a year worth of engagement with customers and folks in Connecticut. So we call it the CX Action Plan for short. The CX Action Plan was published before I came to DOT, but was one of the things I was most excited about when I took my role. So the CX Action Plan had over 10,000 points of engagement with people who use the system, people who operate the system, people who don't use the system, really to try and understand what priorities were. And the result of all of that was 3 broad priority focus areas: improve service, make it easier to use, and enhance accessibility and comfort. And then within each of these buckets, there were specific action items that were recommended. And it was launched in 2023, and the commitment was to have an annual progress report. So this past July, we published our 2nd annual progress report. Some of the things that I'm most excited about include the launch of a tap and ride pilot to make it easier for customers to pay. So for those that may not know, you can use your credit card or your phone's digital wallet to literally just tap when you board the bus, and that is your bus pass. My colleague Dan Baker was on the show last year to talk about a couple of the things inside the CX Action Plan that I'm really excited about. Launched a tap and ride pilot last year, and we had a successful pilot. I think the most important thing from the pilot was actually the lessons learned that are going to help shape a statewide rollout, so that right now we have 1 transit district in the state that you can use your credit card to tap, and it has fare capping, and it even works for our senior and disabled discounted fares. So it provided the foundation to move to a statewide rollout, which we're in the very early phases of doing. And I was saying my colleague Dan was on the podcast last year to talk about this. And I'm really proud of the way that the team went out and engaged riders, engaged operators to help make them aware and to feel comfortable with the new technology, with the new way to pay. And I can't wait to see when it's launched statewide.
This seems like another benefit of a state agency being able to work with other state agencies, right? Because like you talked with Jillian at Cal ITP, they were on last year, episode 504. Actually, it was about a year ago. It was like, I think it came out like October 17th or something along those lines. But basically, you have that process where you can work with another state. And luckily, Jillian's been putting together this program that allows other agencies that might be a little smaller to benefit from the size of California and the ability to create contracts. And I feel like that's a benefit. But also the ability to tap to pay and all the payment systems just makes it easier to ride. And so from a customer experience standpoint, there's a number of things on the chart. There's like a 3-section chart that I saw with the customer experience plan. And a lot of the middle section of the chart was like being able to pay, making it easier for people to get on the bus, et cetera, et cetera. And so everybody benefits from the payment system and being able to just tap or have a card or something along those lines where they can just get on the bus, and it's pretty seamless and frictionless.
Some of the other things that are really exciting coming out of the CX Action Plan, they did like a design lab where customers were able to see different types of seat material for the buses and vote on which ones that they like the best. And so that customer input was then used in the design specs for our order of 50 battery electric buses. And they are now out on the streets in Connecticut. That's really exciting. It's a double win because it's both, we have buses with customer picked amenities like the seats, as well as things like USB chargers and real-time information signs, expanded bike racks, and they're battery electric, helping us move closer to fully electrify our bus fleet by 2035.
You're also putting up bus stations for some of those stops along the way.
Yeah. So we just had a ribbon cutting of the first bus shelter installation that's part of our statewide bus stop enhancement program, or BSEP. I think this might be the first or one of the first statewide bus stop improvement programs. And it's easy for folks to slip up and say it's a bus shelter program. It's not a bus shelter program because not every stop will end up with a shelter. The way that we've designed the program is looked at the 14,000 plus bus stops in the state and categorized them by ridership to determine what level of amenity is appropriate for the stop. And so, of course, the highest ridership stops will be sheltered. Not all of them are now. I believe it's approximately 600 shelters that will be added across the state in the next 4 years. But it's not just about the shelter. It's about ensuring an ADA accessible stop, adding seating, adding real-time information to stops. This is a state-funded project. There's $20 million budgeted for this, and we hope that it is going to enhance customers' experience, make people feel safer, more comfortable when they choose to ride the bus.
I saw the local news report for it, was watching the link for it, and I love like how the newscasters are always like giving you a discussion about the bus stop and making it easier to ride the bus. And I was like, oh, that's a fancy, nice way of putting it. But I also find, bus stops can also be kind of political and fraught with discussion. I mean, and in Los Angeles recently, they had the La Sombrita discussion where there's a lot of politics and also process that needs to go into putting up a bus stop. And so they came up with this idea that really kind of fell flat on its face. And so the bus stops are more robust than that, obviously, the ones that you'll be putting up. But I'm interested also in kind of understanding, like, you choose by ridership, and there's a process for choosing which stops there are. But also, there are those other, thousands of stops that don't get the extra benefit of having the greater amenity. And so I'm wondering if like those are slated to be fixed along the way, or is that something that comes add later and it just depends on funding? Like, how do you decide like, oh, we're only going to do 10% of stops, or we're only going to do 5% of stops? Because every bus stop could be important, but obviously there's political calculations and there's decisions that are made, at a certain level that impact how much of the bus stops in the state can actually get this improvement.
Mm-hmm. So the goal is that eventually we will have upgraded all of the bus stops. all of the bus stops should meet our bare minimum requirements of accessibility and meet the criteria for the type of bus stop. So there's 4 types. I think type 3 has seating but no shelter. So eventually they too will get seating. I think the shelters, it's a combination of 1, the ridership profile, but 2, also we have to enter into a maintenance agreement with the municipality. So it's both we as a state DOT identify that this stop is eligible to have a shelter in our program. The municipality has to also want it and also sign on to the master maintenance agreement. Because I think in many places, there's sometimes a tension between who's responsible for the bus stop and maintaining it, or the shelter, and who's responsible for clearing it of snow and ice in the winter. So a lot of the program design, a lot of thought was put into how do we ensure that once we install these shelters, that they are then taken care of and there's a sense of ownership and pride in them. And so that comes down to the agreement.
What other capital projects are you working on, or is the state working on? There's probably big projects, there's little projects. Obviously, this is not as big as like a mainline railroad or something along those lines, but like what are some of the projects that are coming around the bend that people might be interested in learning about or excited about?
So one that I am very excited about is on the New Haven line. We have 3 branches. One of the branches is the Waterbury branch, and construction has started. We are upgrading all of the platforms at the stations along the Waterbury branch. They're currently low-level boarding platforms, and we are in construction now to create fully accessible platforms. And I think this is going to be such a big win for our customers. Not only is it going to make boarding easier for everyone, but especially those who are using a wheelchair or other mobility devices. But the project also includes platform amenities that are going to make the experience of waiting for your train much more enjoyable. We have heated platforms, windshields, better lighting. A lot of thought went into how to make these platforms feel comfortable and a place that people want to wait for their train. In addition, one of the platforms is in the borough of Naugatuck, and it's being relocated, and they're moving it to be adjacent to like the downtown Naugatuck area. And that is going to create opportunity for transit-oriented development in that area. Both the borough have invested a lot of their, municipal capital funds into improvements in that area. And so I hope that this is an example of sort of the potential of transit-oriented development or transit-oriented communities along Connecticut's rail and bus system. And let's see, other capital projects. We have a really big one at New Haven Union Station. There is the station and then a parking garage and then a surface parking lot. And we have entered into an agreement with a developer to develop mixed-use housing and commercial public space on that lot. So it will go from being a single surface-level parking area to providing housing, jobs, and public amenities for the travelers going to New Haven Union Station and those who live in that neighborhood.
What's been the result of the CT Fast Track bus line? I feel like we saw that being constructed a number of years ago, and then I'm interested to hear like kind of what the results have been so far.
Okay, great. So for those who are not familiar, Connecticut built a 9-mile BRT guideway, and it opened in 2015. This year, we got to celebrate our 10th anniversary of CT Fast Track service. We marked it with this beautiful CT Fast Track bus cake. I had to miss the event, but I heard that the cake was delicious.
What part of a bus cake do you eat first? Do you eat the tires first, or do you eat the windshield? Like, what's the etiquette on eating a bus cake?
I have no idea.
It's a silly question.
So there's the 9-mile guideway, but then CT Fast Track routes link into downtown. They link to the municipalities surrounding Hartford. So one of the great things about CT Fast Track is that it has helped spur development around the alignment. So since 2015, we've seen over $550 million in economic development in the Hartford area, including over 2,000 new residential units being built and more than 250,000 square feet of commercial and office space. And we anticipate more housing units on the way. And these are projects led by the municipalities and, private developers around the CT Fast Track.
What are you excited about? Like, what's the most exciting thing coming around the bend for you?
Okay, so I'll answer this with two different hats on. With my Mpact National Steering Committee hat on, I am super excited to go to Toronto in September of next year. Mark your calendars.
That sounds awesome.
Mark your calendars for September, but also mark your calendars for January, because that's when the call for session proposals is going to go out. And I can't wait to see all of the amazing ideas that are going to come in for next year. With my CTDOT hat on,
Are the new train sets coming your way? Like, are they?
Yes, they are. And it's too bad that we're not in Connecticut right now, because I could show you our mock-up. Yes, we will start receiving our order of 60 Alstom coaches next year. They are beautiful. Had the privilege of seeing the mock-up in person this month, and they're everything that you would dream of in a modern commuter rail car. I think that they are really going to meet the needs of our customers, of our passengers, and I'm excited for them to start arriving in Connecticut next year.
Well, where can folks find out more about what you're doing at Connecticut DOT?
It's a great question. To learn more about what's going on with our Customer Experience Action Plan, head to transitcx.com. You can read the full CX plan that we published in 2023, and then you'll also have both the year 1 and the year 2 progress reports available.
Awesome. And then where can folks find you if you wish to be found?
You can find me on LinkedIn.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, Cortni, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks for joining us. The Talking Headways podcast is a project of the Overhead Wire and appears first at Streetsblog USA. Thanks to our generous Patreon supporters who support this show and Mondays at the Overhead Wire. You can support the show as always by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. Sign up for our almost 20-year-old newsletter as well by visiting theoverheadwire.com, or check out the show notes for merch or other opportunities to connect. Follow along using your podcatcher of choice, but if you can't find it there, you can always find it at its original home at usa.streetsblog.org. We'll see you next time at Talking Headways. Hey everybody, thanks for listening this far past the credits. If you're here, I just want to say thank you to all of our generous Patreon supporters, especially those in our $10 Dallas tier and above. I just want to share their names, first names only, of course, but I figured this is long overdue that I let folks know that their support is much appreciative. Obviously, all the tiers are very appreciative, but this group has gone above and beyond over the years, and I really appreciate that. Andrew, Ben, Derek, Gabrielle, Glenn, Greg, James, Jeremy, Jim, Joseph, Catherine, Mao, Marcus, Matthew, Mike, Nicholas, Oliver, Steve, Abraham, Abby, Ed, and Matthew. We really appreciate you, and just can't say enough about how much the support from you all and everybody else on Patreon has really helped us out. So I just wanted to say a quick thank you to everybody, and yeah, so we'll see you next time.